So I certainly feel a lot more empathetic today. How about you guys? Yeah. And I don't just feel more empathetic, I feel like I have more tools in my empathy toolkit that I'm going to take with me into a lot of situations going forward, so I'm so grateful to be here. Unfortunately, I've observed in my work over the last few years that despite the fact that we're all great at being empathetic, often when we're faced with the most complex and difficult decisions around climate change, legislation, tax policy, and other kinds of decisions, all of the empathy falls on the ground. And so today, I want to build a bridge for you. The good news is there's been kind of a crystallizing, emerging movement happening in the Bay Area, but also all over the world. People who don't quite realize it, but who are putting the pieces together of a new sort of machine that involves empathy and has some computers in it, has a lot of pieces. The machine's not quite built. I think there's just a couple of new links we have to have in the chain in order to make this happen, in order to bring empathy and humanity into our most complex decisions, into government, into legislation, into tax policy, even into cities, into education, where so often our empathy falls apart. So join me on a little bit of a journey. Imagine we're all on a new construction site, and we're going to build the most complex and sophisticated building in the world. And because of that, the foreman who's invited us onto this muddy field, he says, hey, we're not going to use blueprints anymore. We have a new approach. This is what's done by the most sophisticated transnational companies in the world. We've got a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet has 40 worksheets. And we're all going to talk about the spreadsheet, and we're going to exchange the data, and maybe we'll have a workshop and a teleconference, and we'll have meetings and matrixed teams, but we won't use a blueprint. Who would go up in that building? I certainly wouldn't. But yet this is exactly what we're doing when we're making the most complex decisions out there. Organizations are working without a blueprint. And so moving forward to have a blueprint is what we need to do next. Now, I don't know if this is the last link in the chain, or we need 2 or 3 more links in the chain, but I do know it's a critical one. And it seems really simple, a blueprint for decisions, that can't be too hard. And when I show you what it is, you'll say, yeah, that's kind of obvious, what's so special about that? But I promise you it's very special because it takes us out of the small auditory sequential part of our brain, and it moves us into the smart part of our brain, the visual spatial. And when we do that, we get 1,000 times smarter, and we get 1,000 times more empathetic, and 1,000 times better at collaborating in person or even remotely over the internet. So I've been curating some news articles about unintended consequences. Unintended consequences are the things that happen when we don't have a good blueprint for decisions, when an action we take leads to something that we don't want it to result in. And I did a search the other day for the occurrence of the phrase unintended consequences in books. Look at them taking off over the last few decades. At the same time, I did another search for the phrase decision making. For a while, we tried to conquer all these unintended consequences by writing about decision making. But look at this trough of disillusionment. What's going on there? People are giving up. Unintended consequences are so overwhelming, and the complexity of a global world and data and information and people mean that we're all just checking out. Good news is we don't have to check out. Bad news is 14% of organizations, even those making decisions that affect human lives and billions or trillions of dollars, only 14% of organizations actually have a rigorous approach to making complex decisions. If you didn't have a rigorous approach to building a 747, I certainly wouldn't fly in it. But yet that's exactly what we're doing with the most difficult decisions of our lives right now. So I started a company with my co-founder Mark a few years ago, and we started in our small way to build these blueprints for decisions, what I'll tell you about in a minute. And then we build kind of these beautiful visualizations on top of these blueprints that help people to understand what we're talking about. It's sort of like the decision blueprint is like the engine of a car, and we try to build these visualizations that are like the steering wheel so that everybody can use these complex decision models. I think that the work that we've done, largely in commercial, but also in some government work, has a very critical part to play as we solve problems like poverty, hunger, and climate change, because there's massive interdependencies. As we solve problems in food, they impact water, water impacts women, women impact conflict, and if we don't understand these interdependencies, we will have unintended consequences, and our decisions will fall down, I promise you. And this is what's happening today. So let's click into this a little bit. Let's talk about what a decision is. And maybe as I talk this through, you can think of some complex decision that you're facing. Ideally one that you have some time to make, and maybe you do it collaboratively with an organization. Most people think of decisions as choices. I'm going to launch this product. I'm going to enact this policy. I'm going to approve this legislature. But the choice is actually the last thing that happens as we go through a decision. A decision is first an idea in your head that if you take some action, it'll be like the first domino in a chain of dominoes that leads to some outcome. And the mystery is all about how that first domino leads to something in the end. The problem is that any sophisticated decision has about 100 dominoes and about 300 links. And yet, as we go into those meetings and as we look at those spreadsheets and as we have those conference calls, have you seen like C-SPAN or the UN? They're all just standing there talking. And there's sort of this fiction that we can keep these really complex decision models in our heads, and we just can't. This gets even harder when we have a team of people, all of whom have different ideas of their decision, different chains of dominoes of how they think that their actions will lead to outcomes, and everybody's on a different page. So they tell stories, and they have meetings, and they try to explain, well, if we do this, it'll cause this, it'll cause this. If I invest in this company, it should cause this, and then I'll make money. And they talk through these chains of events. And you notice I'm kind of going left to right, because I think that's kind of an easy way to think about this. Some action leads to some outcome. The good news is it's actually really simple to take this invisible decision-making process that we're largely blind to and make it visible. Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we build a blueprint? I mean, we're like in this day before, we're building dog houses and we've never built a skyscraper before. So one of kind of the epiphanies Mark and I had as we're interviewing people for our company is every decision had 5 or 6 kind of basic parts. And just a couple of them. Every decision has a lever, something you can change. Every decision has 1 or more outcomes, things that you're trying to achieve. And then if you talk to people, go home tonight, ask your friends to describe some decision they're facing, and you say, well, why would you make that decision? They'll say, well, because it'll cause this, and it'll cause this, and it'll cause this, I think. The other part of a decision is the environment, the external factors that influence that decision. If I'm going to charge $5 for my product, and my competitor charges $2, I'd better know about that, because that's going to affect whether my $5 decision is a good pricing choice or not. So let me tell you about a decision we modeled a few years ago. This was a project in collaboration with the Carter Center, and they asked us to build a little decision model for a project called their Community Justice Advisor Program. This involved folks, local speakers and local folks from villages who are trained up in some basic legal mediation, as well as trained up in the ability to help people navigate through the formal legal system. And the idea was, for a relatively low cost compared to like investing in a law school or some other big infrastructure project, these paralegal advisors could go out into the countryside and they could advise people if they had some kind of a legal conflict, if somebody stole something or if there was a land dispute. As it turns out, there's a number of studies that show this kind of an intervention can really improve your trust in the rule of law. You'll trust the state. And there's other studies that show if you trust your government to protect you, you're less likely to proactively take up weapons and attack your neighbors because you trust that the government will protect you and you don't need to do that. If there's that reduction in conflict, that's going to increase the likelihood that businesses will be stable, and it'll also increase the likelihood of foreign investment, which increases the tax base, which lets the government have more money, which it can then invest in even more programs like policing. This is a virtuous cycle, right? And you can imagine how it reverses the vicious cycle. Every single complex decision I've ever modeled has these virtuous and vicious cycles in them that end up really dominating how everything fits together. And we can't get this unless we start drawing pictures of our decisions, creating these decision blueprints, and they're not hard to do. They're just boxes and arrows, cause and effect. Do them with your friends. Another magic thing that happens when we build these decision models is we can build these simulations on top of them. And this is a simulation we built, there it goes, that of Liberia. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the counties that had this intervention, that has these community legal advisors. You can see they're getting more and more green over time. That represents the fact that the conflict is decreasing and the economy is improving. So again, we can build these visualizations on top of these maybe more complex decision models that help people really clearly understand the effectiveness of an intervention. Now this is really cool. There's two ways that empathy plays a part. First, when we can draw these pictures, when we can get everybody kind of on the same page as to how things are working, that's an empathy question. It's a question of having a shared mental model with others in the same situation. The second really exciting thing that happens when we start to build blueprints of decisions is instead of trying to keep everything in our head, we have room on paper. And when we do that, we have room to consider the empathy links. Why would I create this intervention if I didn't understand that local people speaking the local language would probably be more effective than if we bring in someone from the outside? That requires empathy. In fact, every complex decision that I've ever modeled has not just a few empathy links, but some of the core links are empathy links. Other links are economics, right? Dollars and supply chains and flows of information. So those have to be in there too. This is how we join economics and empathy together, is as we work through these cause and effect chains that get put in place, these dominoes that fall down when we make the most complex decisions. This is one I really like because I'm a geek. I do a lot of work in artificial intelligence, and as it turns out, after you implement one of these decisions and you start gathering data from the situation, we can use machine learning and artificial intelligence to learn how those links work better and better over time. Artificial intelligence, I don't need a new app. Why wouldn't we use the most advanced technology we've ever built that powers Google, that powers, recommending a next book on Amazon? Why wouldn't we use that to solve the most complex problems? Because it turns out that exactly the same technology that helps Amazon recommend the next book can be used to learn these links. Just get a lot of data from both of those boxes, feed it to a machine learning system, and it can tell you how the links work. It's not hard. And yet this is a way that we can bring in a mess of technology. It's not just artificial intelligence, but it's some of the insights of Buckminster Fuller, Doug Engelbart, and Deming, and more. We can bring in complexity theory and big data and machine learning and deep learning. This great technology that's developed here in the Bay Area might seem sort of a mess when we think about these complex problems. But building a blueprint for decisions help us pull that mess together. And I sort of think of it as like the technology stack that everybody talks about, but also the human stack. On the top of this picture is kind of an eye chart. It says the human decision maker and then the decision-making team, and at the top, it's stakeholders in the world. Those human teams come together with the technology stack at this point, right in the middle, and that's the decision. It's a small enough thing that we can understand it. It's not like the whole system. It's not like all the data. It's not like a giant database. But it's sophisticated and powerful enough that if we focus on the decision, we can really, really start to take off in our ability to handle these complex problems. This is inevitable. When I was in software 20 or 30 years ago, the idea of design being applied to software was brand new. Software, that's not something you can design. We design physical things like airplanes and buildings. So the whole inside of TED, technology, entertainment, and design, as well as that little drop picture that happens with the ripple effect, all is really deeply resonant with what I'm talking about today. We're taking technology, we're treating something that we've never thought to design before, a decision, as a designed artifact that we can draw a picture of and we can talk about and we can collaborate over. And then we're using entertainment to build a beautiful visualization that democratizes this technology and makes it not something that geeks like me only use or economists only use, but that we can all use collaboratively in a crowdsourced way to solve the most complex problems that we face today. This is inevitable. It's happened in every complex domain. It's how humans deal with complexity. So of course we're going to do this. Without it, we'll be blind to the inside of our decisions. And I'm sorry to say the unintended consequences will explode. We have to go here. People are going to die if we don't. So please join me. Just like the Homebrew Computing Club had a vision. You know, computers had been around for years before these guys got together in the Valley. And yet they had a vision to democratize this advanced technology. Similarly, there's a bunch of folks. I think maybe the Silicon Valley Sim Center is sort of the hub of a wheel. And these guys are pulling together people in these collaborative environments where they're experimenting with decisions and playing with technology and simulations where they change the price of a product or the investment in legal programs. And they're watching those decisions as they flow through and impact their outcomes. And they're crashing those simulators over and over and over again. Because I certainly wouldn't want to fly in an airplane whose pilot hadn't crashed his simulator over and over and over again. Let's crash our simulations. Let's not crash our decisions. Of course we need to go here. And it's not just the Silicon Valley Sim Center, but we've got kind of a latent crystallization of new things that's just emerging just in the last 6 months. This is brand new. We don't have all the pieces right. We might need a couple more links in the chain. But there's a lot of people, like every week I meet somebody new and they're finishing my sentences because they've seen the same problems and they've seen the same big mess of technology, and we've sort of come to the same conclusions about how those two pieces fit together. So I invite you to join me and the other folks in, I don't know, pick your favorite organization here, the Silicon Valley Sim Center or somewhere else, because we need living blueprints for decisions. They're absolutely necessary to solve the hardest problems of our time. Thank you.